Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all for hanging with me on this Sunday. And if you saw my 1-minute weekly segment on Let's Fish TV, and that's why you're here, you won't regret it. I am going to give you the full rundown on flipping grass that is underneath the water. So any type of submergent vegetation. And this isn't chatterbaits and big worms. I'm not going to have any of those baits in this. This is strictly flipping, and if I see a fish jump, I got a couple other baits for that. So this is 6 baits, 6 different rods and reels with different type of line on them. I'm gonna go through the whole setup, down to my hooks, the size weights, a couple different size jigs, a couple different size Texas rigs, a big topwater, and a frog. So I'm gonna go in through the whole thing, explain when you will need these, and what to look for, because this is one of the most fickle bites you'll ever come across. One day it is amazing, it's too easy. The next day you can't get a bite. So I'm going to kind of throw some things I've learned over the last couple decades doing this, because this is something I love to do. I've probably done it more. I've lived down in Florida. We have that. It's what we do a lot of the year. And I live on Guntersville, another place where this is what we do a lot of our year. So let's start off with basically explaining what this is, because you are going to have a couple different opinions when you talk to other people about it. You're going to have fish that are going to be on the outside edge of the grass that are relating to the structure. And by structure, I mean that contour change where it falls off into deeper water. So those fish aren't pushed up under the mat. You're not punching anything to them. You're flipping the outside sparse stuff. You're basically just dropping it in the holes on the outside edge, and those fish are right there on the break. So what you'll typically find is your bait isn't going through anything. You're pitching it down the sides of the grass, almost like you're pitching to trees or bushes, and they're just on there. You typically get them to bite it on the fall so you don't feel that thump. They're just on there, and they're kind of streaking through the grass. That's why you need braided line, and that's why I think 50-pound test is very important instead of the typical 65 you use for punching, because that rate of fall is very important, and feeling them is very important, and it's a lot easier to do with 50-pound braid. So these are the fish that are out on the edge. This is by far the most fickle grass flipping bite. This is the bite I'm talking about when I say the one day you find them doing this, it is too easy. You almost feel bad for the fish. Big rod, big line, big hook. You're just snatching on them. They have no idea you're there, and it's easy. Then the next day they're gone. Now, I'm not going to go into where they went, because most of the time I don't ever find them. This is one of those techniques that I've had some of my worst tournaments and my best tournaments. The days where I've had my best tournaments, I couldn't believe how easy it was, and couldn't believe that the other fishermen that I was fishing against didn't figure it out. And then there were other days where I didn't think I knew anything about fishing, and I never ever got a bite doing it and spent half my day doing it. So I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think that is something, after 20 years of tournament fishing, I've realized the really good anglers do, and it starts from the very beginning when they show up to a lake. So think about watching some of your favorite fishermen on TV. John Cox, for instance. You always see him catching fish on a wacky rig. Keith Poche, you always see him catching fish on a shaky head. Doesn't matter where he's at, it's on a bait caster, it looks like a bigger shaky head, but he's fishing shallow with that bait. Same thing with John Cox, he's fishing a wacky rig shallow. I think there's something to that. And it's not just he has confidence in that bait. I think that they know if they find fish on those baits, they typically can go back and catch fish on those baits. If you find fish on a bait like a spinner bait or something crazy where the fish are just obviously biting, and you go back to them and you give them a more subtle or a more realistic looking option, you can typically find those fish if they're not still biting your spinner bait. But I also feel like there's something to the other end of the spectrum where if you find them on the most finesse, subtle bait, you can typically go back and catch them on those same baits. And I don't know why, but it seems like if you're catching them on a bait that is up in the water column, the most obvious thing that the fish are going to do when they change is they just get off whatever's up in the water column. They go down to the bottom. They're feeding on crayfish or bluegill or whatever, but that's the best way to change is, okay, they're not biting my top water, they're not biting my chatterbait, I'm going to drag something slow on the bottom, and you typically catch them. And vice versa to that is you found them flipping or you found them dragging something slow on the bottom, and oh no, they've got off the brim or the crayfish or whatever they were feeding on the bottom of the lake or river. Now they're up in the water column, so you need to imitate a shad. And you see most jig fishermen, they're good at that. 1 second they're dragging something, and then their partner starts catching them on a square bill up in the water column. Instead of them going to a square bill, they just go to a white jig and start swimming it up in the water column, and they start catching them. So it's not too complex when you think about what's actually going on inside the fish's head. They got off whatever they're eating on the bottom, and now they're eating on something that's up. You just got to give them that different offering. Now, the reason I bring that all up, because that is the most complicated, most difficult thing to do in fishing, is to try to go back to the same places you were catching them yesterday and catch them again, and you rarely ever catch them the same way. So this is one of those techniques. It is really hard to duplicate, and don't be surprised if it goes away. So for that reason, I've got a couple other ways to give it a quick run through of these baits before you're like, okay, this isn't gonna work. I need to go to a different part of the lake. So this is the 1 ounce jig. This is strictly for flipping 6 to like 20 feet of water on that side of the grass. So they're on the edge. You're not punching it through the grass. You're flipping in the holes on the edge. And a lot of times your bait is gonna fall 6 or 7 feet because you're out on that creek channel or that main river ledge, but you are on the edge. Now, this is a good size, 1 ounce when you have wind. You may have, just you need that quicker fall, and you can play with your trailers. Instead of a Menace Grub, Rage Menace that I have on there, you can go to a Rage Craw. That's going to slow it down a little bit. You really need to slow it down. Go to a 3/4 ounce jig. This is going to fall fairly slow. I mean, you're going to see it. This is a clear water technique. So going down to this 3/4 ounce jig is just something I play with. Typically, you're going to find those fish with the 1 ounce, and then when you know you're around them and they're easy to catch, the 3/4, you can really slow down with this, and you know your bait's not falling by any fish that don't feel it or see it. So that's why I keep the 3/4 in there. It's good to mix and match, and a lot of the times when you find fish with this technique, it's going to be a school in the grass. So you're not going to just be fishing for individuals. You can make 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 flips to the same exact spot in the grass and continuously pull out bass. That's where this gets really fun. So there's the 1 ounce in the 3/4. But like all jig flipping, you need to understand that a jig just goes away. That's just how jig fishing is. There's days where they're really on it, and there's days where you can't catch anything on it, and you have to take heed of that and also have a Texas rig tied on. And the Texas rig can be a lot of different things. It can be a Cinco, it can be a speed worm or something, but for the purpose of keeping this video as short as I can, I just do a creature bait with some type of kicking action. So I like 2 different size Texas rigs, but most of the time when I'm flipping that outside edge, it's a 1 ounce. 3/4 to me is going to be okay, and that 3/4 is going to fall about as fast as that 1 ounce jig does. But to me, you're not really straying too far away from what you've already showed them with that 1 ounce jig. So I think a 1 ounce Texas rig is going to fall significantly faster than that 1 ounce jig, and that may be the reason you're not getting the bite. So for me, that, and I still keep that on 50. So everything I've showed you so far, 50-pound braid, flip and stick, high-speed reel. Okay, now if the fish have pushed up into the mats, so what typically happens in the summertime is you're going to have fish that first in the post-spawn, late springtime, they're going to go offshore. They're going to get out on some type of structure if your lake has that, or just go out there and suspend in the abyss. It's what every bass typically does in the post-spawn. Then they're going to get on the structure, and if your lake has grass, they're going to relate to the deepest grass around that structure, and that's just where the bait's going, fishing pressure, they're kind of getting all banged up. They're going to move back into the grass. Now, the reason they're using that deeper grass is because you don't have a hard line of shallow grass yet, and you don't have that defined matted vegetation in deep enough water where there's oxygen and it's cool for them to want to be there. Once we get further into summer, that grass is going to grow out in the deeper water, like let's say 6 feet, it's going to start topping out right around the time where the lakes are going to turn over and bass are going to start wanting to get shallow again. And then they're going to have this deeper water that has topped out vegetation. So it's providing shade, oxygen, and it's still in deep enough, cool enough water that gives the fish plenty of refuge, and it's comfortable. So for that reason, that's when you can start punching it. You're also going to see things like the grass is going to start dying too, which when it starts dying, that's going to also kind of pull them off the edge and tuck them back underneath it. When the grass dies, those roots break out from underneath the bottom, but it still kind of holds in place, making the perfect canopy. That's when the punching bite really starts taking off. So you're going to have a combination of grass growing in all different depth ranges, and you're going to have some shallow grass that's typically growing around lily pads, and you can punch earlier in the year because that's kind of hollowed out underneath. But this deeper grass that I'm talking about is going to start matting up, and then the punching thing is going to be a deal. And you're also going to have grass that's not just hydrilla or milfoil or eelgrass or chopped up stuff. You're going to have your hyacinth and stuff that's just always a mat, doesn't grow off the bottom like these other grasses I'm talking about, and you can always punch that. And whenever I am flipping the jig on that outside edge, I'm also looking for some shallower punching fish. They just seem to be more consistent. If I have a couple of different patterns going on with the punching thing, it typically works out. So this is 1.5 ounces. For some reason, I have a punch skirt on here. I always use a super heavy cover hook by Gamakatsu, so it's a straight shank flipping hook, and this is an extra heavy cover, super extra heavy cover flipping hook. So it's a super thick hook, and that seems to be one I've never bent out. And then I'm going up to 65-pound braid. So when I go up to this 1.5 ounces, I'm going up to 65-pound braid. So it's a lot like when you're flipping like a lighter Texas rig and you're flipping on fluorocarbon, and you get above like 5/8, go above 3/4, somewhere around there, you have to switch over to braid. I like 50-pound when I go from like my 20 and 25-pound fluorocarbon. When I go up in weight size, I go to that 50-pound. That's from like a 3/4 to 1 ounce. And once I get to 1.5 ounces, then it's up to 65. Because at 65, I'm typically flipping it in super heavy cover, and it's not really the rate of the fall at that point so much. You have 1.5 ounces, that thing's going to be going to the bottom plenty quickly. So these are all places you need to check when you're flipping grass. If you can just get them on the outside edge with that big jig, just roll with that. But a lot of times they'll push up further in there, or they'll leave completely and you'll never find them. That's when you need to go also be looking for some punching fish in that matted vegetation. Now, here is 2 other baits. These aren't flipping baits, but these are baits you definitely need or you're going to be unprepared. So a frog. Bobby's perfect. It's my favorite when it comes to fishing around mats. You can weight it down, put some BBs in there, put some rattles in it, or keep it the way it is. I always trim those legs super short when I'm fishing because the bass aren't really seeing your bait so much. It's just over the top of the vegetation. They're kind of just feeling it. You want to make sure that they're getting the hooks. And one other thing I will tell you about this, don't hook this on your reel. It'll kind of smash your frog down and it won't run true. I always just hook it on that first guide there, and then it won't disfigure the frog. Okay, you need the frog. One blows up, maybe a storm rolls through, the whole mat comes alive, the frog, you can do a lot of damage. And then you also need a big topwater walking bait. I'm not saying you have to make a bunch of casts with this, but when you're flipping that outside grass, a lot of times you will see a blow up. Conditions change a lot. You always have little cells rolling through this time of year. 1 second, it's calm, nothing's happening, nothing moves. You're not seeing any bait fish, you're seeing nothing at all. And then breeze starts rolling in, storms are kind of circling around, and everything comes alive. That's when you pick up that spook, make a cast, make 5 casts, whatever. You can catch a big one doing that. So that's something I always have tied on when I'm fishing around mats. That is vegetation, punching, flipping. Try that. This is a big deal this time of year, even though it's not the most consistent bite. When it is on, this is a tournament winning best way to catch the biggest bags on the lake technique. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.